Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Tuesday evening, August 25, 2015. And we sure had some problems getting Nightcast on the air tonight, friends. We had a few problems last night, but the problems we had tonight, well, I think there's a reason for that, and I'm not going to mention that. It was equipment related, but also operator related too. Okay, let's get to the first story tonight from Europe. Europe's Commissioner for Migration has promised a war against people smugglers and said migrants who've traveled to the EU for purely economic reasons will be returned home. Chris Buckler reports from Athens.
For days, this ship has been gathering people from the islands all around Greece and bringing them to Athens. Many hundreds of refugees arrive on each voyage. And you can see what it means when they reach land. In some cases, finding family and friends. But can Europe accommodate everyone? Tens of thousands arrived here in Greece in this month alone. And in weighing up who should be allowed to stay, the European Commissioner responsible for migration says there is a difference between people fleeing countries in conflict and those simply looking for a better life.
The ones who are in need of international protection, they will have it. It's our duty. It has to do with the basic principles of the European, architecture. But the others who just cross the borders, just cross the sea in order to come to Europe in an irregular way, they have to be returned.
Yet the number of refugees alone is significant. Many from countries like Syria, and they arrive in Athens with plans to look for opportunities elsewhere in the EU, in countries like Germany.
How are you going to get to Germany from here? Train, bus, how are you going You're going to walk?
Yes, walk.
To Germany?
To Germany.
From Greece?
Yes. Everybody.
The families here are carrying all they have, and there is a concern that as they try to head north, they could become vulnerable to people smugglers.
It's a nightmare for these people. Who to trust? They come into one country who they don't speak the language, who they don't know where to go.
There is an acceptance that more needs to be done to protect both people and borders in Europe.
We have decided to declare a war against smugglers. Some of these networks, they are better equipped and organized than states.
However people get here, making it away from the problems of homelands like Syria is an emotional moment.
How do you feel?
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are journeys still to be completed. So many here are still looking for a final destination. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Athens.
All right, people trying to get out of a very bad situation, kind of getting themselves into another bad situation, in a way. But if things are so bad where they're coming from, that perhaps they have high hopes enough the fellow's going to walk from Greece to Germany, he said. And other people, some of the people saying they come here not knowing the language, they need to ask for help, they can't get it. It reminds me when I was going through France, when I was wanting to make a trip. I had just been in Israel. I was wanting to make a trip by train from France to Vienna. I was going to the Royal Treasury. Some of you have heard me mention this before, to see the crown of the Holy Roman Empire that's on display there. And I'm at the train station in, was it Paris, or did I leave from south of there down to Monterrey? I'm not sure, but I think it probably was Paris. I was taking the train from Paris to Vienna through Germany. Beautiful train trip. I made it, but just by the skin of my teeth because I had 2 years of French, a week at a French feast site with local French brethren renewing my French lessons for me, correcting things that I didn't learn in 2 years of French. So I'm in the French train station trying to ask for directions to saying, where's my train to Vienna? Nobody there, even though I think some of them could, none of them would speak English with me. They were making me have to speak French. And I'm trying to say I need le train to Vienna. Well, I couldn't get the explanation that, and for some reason I wasn't thinking of the city name Vienna, would not be in French or English. It's going to be in German. And as I see this train pulling out slowly, it had been in the dock there for a little while. It said W-I-E-N on top of the train. And as it's been there for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm still trying to ask for the train to Vienna. That train starts pulling out of the station. And all of a sudden, a gong went off in my head like a gong, or an alarm clock, or a gong. It said W-I-E-N. They speak German in Austria. And that is the name for Vienna. W-I-E-N, Vienna. That's Vienna. The W is pronounced like a V in German. I hadn't studied any German, but when I realized that's my train pulling out of the station now, and it's, just going slow, and I have made the mistake of not checking my bags somewhere. I had 3 bags I was traveling with. Pretty good sized bags, too. Suitcase, couple suitcases and a duffel bag. And as that train starts pulling out, I just start throwing my bags through the open door way on one train. Then the train's going a little faster. I throw my second bag two car lengths down. Now 2 or 3 or 4 cars have gone by, and boom, I throw my last bag on there. And then 5 or 6 cars later, I jump on an open door as this train's speeding up. And I spent the next, I don't know how long, half hour, rounding up my bags through that train. All right, but friends, we got a lot of news tonight. Let me get us on with the news. Point is, those people traveling, not speaking the language, they're probably going to have some problems with that. And that fellow going to walk from Greece to Germany. I tell you, that's still... And he says it with confidence. The lady asked him, the reporter asked him, you're walking from Greece to Germany? Yeah, a lot of others are too. And they're young, and maybe they'll chew that off. All right, next story, friends, is coming from, where are we coming from with this? Crimea. Crimean Tatar television director has comments in this story on being forced off the air. Sarah Rainsford spoke to ATR Deputy Director Lilia Bazarova in Simferopol. Originally focused on culture and entertainment, ATR became a key voice of opposition to annexation by Russia, broadcasting the protest of Crimean Tatars live, among other things. After Russia's takeover, unable to renew the license, ATR was eventually forced to close down. Let's go to Sarah Rainsfield with this report.
Остатки былой роскоши.
Это утренняя тогда.
Здесь студия утренней программы.
ATR Broadcasting Crimea.
We showed what was happening in Crimea. Of course, we followed the dramatic events last year. We were live on air every half hour, telling our people what was happening. I think that was one of the big reasons why we were closed down. We showed things objectively, not censored, not invented, live, without comment. They could not forgive that. Last May, I got a warning from the prosecutor about extremist activity. We realized then it was no joke. I worked like I had tiny manicure scissors in my head. We began to act very carefully. We knew any mistake would be fatal. But there is no Russian law banning criticism of the local authorities. So we talked about the problems with the roads, education, health, and they didn't like it. For 6 months, we tried to register according to the new Russian law. The cynical thing is that we were never actually refused, but our documents were returned 5 times, each time with new mistakes. In the end, we were forced to stop broadcasting on April 1st. The decision is absolutely political. Many others got their license within a week, but the government simply could not conceive how an independent Crimean Tatar channel could exist. In June, ATR began working in Kiev. We don't broadcast from our studio here. We work as studio production, that's not banned. A third of our journalists have gone, probably half of our technicians. Many people wanted to leave last year. But these are not just journalists. They are doing something important for their people. The Crimean Tatars lived through the dreadful deportation. They spent half a century in exile. Then, in the 1990s, we returned home. But no one wanted us here. When we built houses, they were destroyed by bulldozers. Our people couldn't get jobs. But step by step, people began to build their new life in Crimea, to restore their culture. This was not just a job. We poured our hearts and souls in here, because we were making history, the first ever Crimean Tatar TV channel. It was very hard when one day it ceased to exist. We didn't believe it. For us, ATR was like a child that you'd help to its feet and was walking forward. Then they snatched the child off you.
Нам было очень тяжело. Мне 57 лет. Я вернулась на родину, когда мне было больше 30.
I am 57. I came back to this land when I was more than 30. I left a good job and home in Tashkent. I lived in a barn here. I did it because I wanted to live in the homeland of my ancestors. And I won't leave easily. Even if a tank drives over me, I will be buried in this soil. And many people think the same way.
По мне ездить танком, меня похоронят в этой земле.
Whew, boy, friends, there's a story that should touch your hearts in one way and should enable some of us who follow what Jesus Christ told us to do in Luke 21, verse 36, to be watching current events, watching our own conduct as well, as he said in verses 34 and 35 of Luke 21, take heed that you be not surfeiting, overeating, overdoing anything, or become involved in drunkenness or the cares of this world. And he said, take heed. Then he said, watch these things I've been telling you about in the early parts of this chapter, the seals from the book of Revelation 6. 4 of them are active now. Last night I didn't put our chart up on the screen at all. I'll put it up for just a few minutes tonight, for just a few moments or at least. The first 4 very active seals. We try to cover the stories that relate to these, especially here on Nightcast. The first seal related to religious deception, false Christ. Jesus Christ having said that many will come in my name, saying that I, Jesus Christ, am indeed the Christ, and yet they'll deceive many. And then the second seal depicted in Revelation by a red horse. Christ described that in plain language in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as war and rumors of war. And the third seal depicted in Revelation by a black horse. Jesus Christ described the scarcity of food that Revelation makes mention of by the balances in the hand. He described it in a simple word, limus, famine. And the fourth seal depicted in Revelation by a pale horse with a rider named Death, alongside whom rides Hades, or hell, the grave. And Christ described that in plain language as disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, and mentioned that also between the third and fifth seal, we peg it here at the bottom of the fourth seal, would be seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, etc. And Christ said in Matthew 13, verse 8, before the mega trouble of the fifth seal, before the great tribulation trouble, there would be terike, trouble that leads up to the big trouble, trouble that is defined as roiling waters, both literally and figuratively in the sense of mobs and seditions, and just trouble like we're seeing a lot of in today's current news. And these stories out of China related to the China market slump affecting the whole globe. We've got several stories on that for you tonight, friends, and China has done something that could ease the problem, and several stock markets around the world went up some because of it. But there's a lot involved in it, and we're going to try to educate you to a few things and some of the stories that I handpicked for us tonight out of dozens and dozens of stories on this China market slump. One thing China did, their central banks cut interest rates. And the caption with this, now I've got some pictures that I think you're going to find. And by the way, we've got the story on the fires in the U.S. tonight. We'll close with that story. But first, the caption with this first photograph here, friends, reads this way. Man with hands on his head. Here you see, that's all the caption reads. Well, China has reduced its main interest rate to boost growth in its economy. The People's, wait till you see some of these other pictures we have for you tonight, friends. The People's Bank of China cut its key lending rate by 0.25 percentage points to 4.6% in an effort to calm stock markets after 2 days of turmoil. It's the fifth interest rate cut since November and will take effect tomorrow. The move has boosted global share prices further, with London's FTSE 100 jumping 3%, while Germany's DAX gained 5%, and the Paris CAC rose by 4.1%. Other European markets, including Lisbon, Madrid, Moscow, and Milan, all closed sharply higher. We'll show you a video with graphics on what's happening in a moment. Meanwhile, here's a chart showing China's central role in world trade. Well, that graphic is not showing up. Okay, probably need to convert that to a different format to get it to work on our on-screen system here. But Wall Street buckled. Wall Street bucked the trend, having initially surged. All three main stock indexes in the U.S. reversed sharply in the final hour of trading. The Dow Jones Index eventually closed 1.3% lower. We ought to have the weather, that music that public radio uses right there, stormy weather. Dow Jones closed 1.3% lower, while the S&P 500 dropped 1.4%. The People's Bank said that the interest rate cut was to reduce the social cost of financing to promote and support the sustainable, healthy developments of the real economy. It also acted to increase the flow of money in the economy by cutting the amount of cash banks must keep in its reserve, effectively freeing them to lend more cash. The central bank's move was broadly welcomed by economists. A research note from J.P. Morgan stated, quote, China's decision to cut will be regarded by many investors as overdue. The litmus test will come overnight, however, and the efficacy of the cut in boosting the domestic stock market. Let me read you that statement again, friends. The litmus test will come overnight, however, and the efficacy of the cut in boosting the domestic stock market. Singapore-based investor Jim Rogers said he thought the panic over the Chinese market would be over soon. Quote, I haven't sold any Chinese shares. A couple of days ago when they really collapsed, I bought more. Of course, I'm losing money now on those. That kind of panic selling usually means the bottom is coming. Usually means the bottom is coming. And I would suspect before too much longer, the bottom will be in place. I remind those of you who grew up with or who have listened to or studied the broadcast or the sermons or the Bible studies of God's apostle for these latter days, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, who several decades ago warned us, brethren, prepare to reduce your standard of living. And we may be at the door where those who've been wise to do that will find it easier on themselves than those who didn't listen to that good advice or didn't hear it. Now, what, friends, is a bear market? Well, we've got an educational video by the BBC, but let me ask the rest of the questions. What's a bear market or a currency devaluation? The BBC explains some of the words being used to describe the recent stock market turmoil. This very well done video report is by BBC video journalist Marcus Thompson. And for those of you listening by podcast or, by audio, I'll do my best to keep up with the subtitles that appear with this video for you here. Bear market. A bear market is when a market falls 20% from its peak. And they got a little bear dancing here on the graphic. The Asian financial crisis started in Thailand in 1997 after a property bubble burst. Currencies and stock markets plunged across Asia. And then there's a curse word by an investor or onlooker at the stock markets board. Now there's a dollar sign, a Japanese yen sign, or let's see, is that a Chinese yuan sign and a European euro sign? Currency devaluation. Currency devaluation is when a country lowers the value of its currency against other currencies, making its exports cheaper, but its imports more expensive. That's a currency devaluation, which is what China recently has done. Market correction is a fall of 10% from a market's peak. That's a market correction. Not quite a bear market, usually short-term declines in the stock market. Market correction. Now there's 3 graphics and it says commodities. Commodities are raw materials or primary agricultural products, food, metals, oil and gas. Pre-market trading is share deals made outside official hours, usually for big financial institutions trading large blocks of shares. And there's a graphic of a couple of dudes on the screen clicking their champagne bottle or wine bottles and saying deal. Okay. Now, what's next for the global economy after these Chinese market woes? The caption with this opening photograph with this story, friends, reads, "What does heavy weather on the Chinese markets mean for global economic climate? Now, what we got for you, let's see. I think this is a video. Yes, indeed it is. And it may be one that, without audio, we'll have to, again, for those of you listening on a podcast, I'll try to read these for you, if in fact that's what this is. Let's see. Okay, no, that just actually came up as a picture only. Now, what I have for you next, I don't know what happened to that story or that video, but I've got some, before we go to the wildfire things, friends, I've got a whole collection here for you of maybe 10, almost a dozen. E-F-G-H-I-J-K-L. Yeah, I have a dozen pictures related to people reacting to what's happened out of China. The stocks fall in facial expressions is the title of this story. On Black Monday, China's all-important Shanghai Composite Index fell 8.5% in its worst collapse since 2007, sending shockwaves around the world. Here is the story as told through the expressions and gestures of the traders and investors. This first one, friends, the caption with it reads, "An unusually high number of investors in China are immature." A woman in one area reflected the general mood, as you can see on her face here. The man in this picture sitting in a brokerage in Beijing was visibly distraught. Green means down on the Chinese market boards. A concerned glance up from one screen to another in Tokyo. Japan disbelief, perhaps? And the caption with his next one, friends. Investors across the world had alarming news to wake up to. These men in Mumbai, India, were closely watching the falling figures. A trader in Mumbai, China's dramatic drop is largely down to fears that the rate its economy is growing could be slowing more than thought. The scene on the floor in Frankfurt. Across the Atlantic, New York Stock Exchange traders had a busy day and a frustrating one. Black Monday in New York was a long, long day. This trader found some time to take some tension outside. In Chicago, however, the anxiety was evident too. And that's our story in pictures in global expressions around the world of the Chinese stock market slump. Now, our next story, friends, U.S. There was one more. We missed one picture for you there. And let's see, let me go back. The caption on that one was, "The anxiety was evident too." In Chicago, the anxiety was evident too. Okay. Now, the United States West Coast wildfires. We've got a special video by the BBC in 60 seconds. Wildfires are still burning across the west coast of the United States, and authorities are struggling to deal with them. They are particularly bad in Washington state, which is experiencing the largest fire in its history. Now, for those of you listening by podcast, I'll read the captions with this video special report. It's showing Okanogan County in Washington, just above Seattle. And you see a glowing fire burning. The Okanogan complex has 5 wildfires there, covering a 1,000 square kilometer area, expected to spread further. Wildfires in Washington state, there are 16, only 10% contained. 5,000 homes are under threat. And there are pictures here of firemen and fires burning. 1,200 plus firefighters are involved. Reinforcements have come from Australia and New Zealand. Officials say fires could go on for months. And those fires are already, the reports we gave you last week, friends, those fires are costing the United States more than $100 million per week. The budget has been blown, and these fires could go on for months, officials are saying. And that $100 million a week is just the cost of paying for the firefighting equipment and the firefighters. That does not include the damage of what all is being burned in these fires. You know, one thing we constantly remind you of, friends, on this program is 2 chapters in the Bible that, and we've called for a long time in our church, the blessing and cursing chapters. That's just short and sweet what they are. In each chapter, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, God starts off by saying, if you will hearken to my voice and obey my commands, my judgments, my statutes, then I'll bless you. And he enumerates how he will bless us, both individually and nationally. And then about halfway through each of those 2 chapters, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, he then says, but if you won't obey me, then just the opposite of blessings, cursings. And he calls it that, cursings. And he describes each of the curses, which in most cases are just exactly the opposite of the blessing. Instead of being the head of your country being the head, you'll become the tail. Instead of you being the lender, you'll be the borrower. Instead of you chasing your enemies will chase you. When you're being blessed, he says 5 of you will chase 100. 100 of you will put 10,000 to flight. But he says, if you don't obey me, then I'll ultimately, after continuing to punish you through 7 different stages, then I'll break the pride of your power. And you'll really be ad hoc with your enemies. And he says in Leviticus 26, verse 4, right after saying in verse 3, if you obey me, I'll give you rain in due season. That's both an individual and a national blessing. Meaning if you got fruit trees in your backyard, God's going to bless them. Rain in due season. Nationally, you'll have the right amount of rain, not too little so that you have drought, such as brings about the conditions like we have up in the Washington state, where fires can just run rampant as they are and expected to go on, as officials are saying, for months. And rain in due season also means not only not too little rain, but not too much rain either, so that you would have flooding, like we've been seeing in many news stories around the world. That should tell us something. That's God's word speaking. That's not me or anyone else making this up. That's just simply God's word. He says, if you obey me, rain in due season. Not too little so that you have drought, not too much so that you have flooding. So when you have drought or flooding, that should be kind of like, duh, hey, a majority of us in this country must not be obeying our Creator, and a good time to fast and pray. And God says, if you do that, seek Him with all your heart, He'll turn these curses around for you. And then we would have blessings. Friends, that's it for this Tuesday night report. We'll have a lot more. I've already got some things in the packet for tomorrow. So hope you'll tune back in with us tomorrow night. Until that's it for this Tuesday night report. We're back on, God willing, and the creek don't rise Wednesday night with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Until next time here on Nightcast, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying thanks for joining me, friends. So long now, and good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.